Welcome to Voices of Australia, a podcast where we explore different perspectives on how to build a cohesive society. Our sense of belonging is vital, as it provides us with a sense of identity, social support, safety, preparedness for community engagement, and personal well-being. It helps build stronger communities, promotes unity, and enhances the overall fabric of society. But there remain some concerns. The most recent results from the Scanlon Foundation Research Institute's Mapping Social Cohesion surveys reveals a decline in Australia's sense of belonging, especially among the young and those who feel economically vulnerable. Yet interestingly, despite Australia's rapid demographic shifts, a strong sense of community persists within neighbourhoods. In this episode, we will explore these changes in the context of Australia's fast-growing regions. We're unpacking the implications of Australia's evolving neighbourhoods and demographic changes on our sense of belonging, both on a national and local scale. And most importantly, we'll discuss how we can ensure no communities in our rapidly expanding regions are left feeling disconnected or overlooked. To begin, let's better understand how urban development, infrastructure and community involvement contribute to a sense of belonging in Australia's changing suburbs. To help us better understand this is our guest, Bronwen, who is the CEO of the National Growth Areas Alliance. Bronwen has spearheaded the significant advocacy wins for the Alliance at the federal level through campaigns such as Catch Up with the Outer Suburbs and National Nightmare Commute Day. She has gained widespread reach in community and political spheres. As the chair of Volunteering Victoria, she plays a vital role in promoting active citizenship and building resilient communities. Welcome, Bronwen.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm very intrigued by National Nightmare Commute Day because currently in Victoria, I think there's a lot of people that would be able to relate to National Nightmare Commute Day. To the point where the government's actually asking people to work from home rather than bother to commute in.
That's right.
What was the genesis of National Commute Day, Nightmare Commute Day?
It was trying to show politicians and decision makers the lived experience of a long commute from the outer suburbs into work every day in traffic. And so we thought, how can we do this that's sort of builds a sense of community right across the country and is something that we can all participate in. So we asked people from the outer suburbs when they arrived at work to post on social media how long it took them and how far they travelled. And sometimes, people would put a selfie up saying, hey, I only actually had to come 7 kilometres, but because of the growth in my suburb and the one road out of my suburb, it took me 55 minutes. Or others can say, I left home before dark and I had to park 15 minutes walk away from the train station. So that was the genesis of it. And we sort of thought, what can we call it? Because, it's got to have a catchy sort of relatable title. And over again, we just heard people say to us, Nightmare Commute. And so we created National Nightmare Commute Day. And it worked a treat.
Absolutely. It is interesting, isn't it? I mean, for everything from utopia to major discussions on things like Q&A all tend to focus around this this issue to do with infrastructure, how important it is to have infrastructure that works well, but the pain when it's actually being developed is enormous. So it does create a whole lot of issues about my day-to-day life compared to what I hope the suburb will actually be able to cater for in the long term. Is that one of the things that the National Growth Areas Alliance deals with?
In a way. So we're talking about those outer suburban areas that are right on the outskirts of the city, I suppose, greater metropolitan cities, so Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth. And there are lots of brand new suburbs being built. so greenfield development. And I think people who live sort of closer to the CBDs or middle ring suburbs would be absolutely shocked if they went for a drive and saw how far our cities extend and how far people live away from the CBD but still feel like they're part of that city. And so we've got a double whammy problem with infrastructure. The first is successive governments just have not built transport infrastructure as people moved into areas. Mm-hmm. So there's suddenly an extra 5,000 cars a day using a single lane road, or, there's a T intersection where trucks are going past and kids are trying to cross an unmade road to get to school. And so the infrastructure isn't being built as people arrive. So that's one issue. And then the other is, we do see, as we speak in this period of time in Melbourne where everything is closed down for major projects to be built, it's all being spent in sort of inner areas. And so while they are all important projects and it will make life easier for people travelling from, the outskirts of the city or crossing the city, all that money is being spent in established areas that are already well served with infrastructure. So it's obviously hard for the federal government to find and state to find that balance. But what we say is we need something built when people arrive. Otherwise it's quite often it's 10, 15 years later.
Yeah, well, ideally before they arrive. But I guess there is some debate as to whether or not we want to continue to grow out. And so that idea of thinking, no, we're going to have to build up in the centre rather than build out it creates a bit of a tension as to what comes first and how do you actually manage those things.
I think the reality is, though, to house and to accommodate our population growth, we need growth in all areas of the city. So we do need to densify, and we do need to go up, in the established areas where there's already existing good road transport, public transport, hospitals, schools. But that's not going to be enough, and it's not going to happen quickly enough to accommodate the number of people who need a home. Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of research, some recently just from Infrastructure Victoria, that found there's still an enormous appetite for people to buy a detached house on a little block of land. And we're not talking quarter-acre blocks anymore. No. We're talking 300 square metre blocks, 400 square metre blocks. Mm-hmm. But it's still something that people really want. And so obviously we just need to give everyone the choice of where they want to live, and knowing that we're going to need apartment blocks and houses to meet our population growth.
Well, and certainly the outer suburbs are more affordable than inner city is. So you are going to get those people that are newly arrived to Australia moving out into the outer suburbs where they can actually realise the dream they had of coming to Australia and owning their home and raising their children in a safe and sort of picturesque environment, if you like.
That's right. And unfortunately, the house might be more affordable, but the lifestyle isn't necessarily more affordable. Mm-hmm. And we did some research just before the pandemic and then a little bit during the pandemic. And we were found that a lot of outer suburban households were spending about 17% of their household income just on transport costs to get to work. So that's enormous.
It is.
And that's not even counting the time it's taking and time away from their family, time away from their community. And during the pandemic, we found not only were outer suburban people who were working from home, not only were they saving a lot of money, they were sleeping better, they were less stressed, the other members of their household were happier. Yeah. And a really important finding was that a lot of full-time carers, so looking after the kids at home, predominantly women, but not all women, found that they suddenly had sort of time and support to think about doing some study or some part-time work or taking in some work to do from home.
Absolutely.
So it really transformed household economies as much as anything else.
So when you talk about the sort of the when we think about the work of the Alliance, it encompasses more than just infrastructure, because as you've just described, there are all these different social elements that play out as a result of how well we manage those growth areas going out.
Right.
So, in your view, how do we balance those social dynamics along with the more physical components?
So I think there's a couple of elements to that, and the first is that, you know, we work on behalf of local governments. So these are councils. We've got 23 councils, you know, who are home to a fifth of Australia's population.
Yes.
So they sort of are only about 6% of councils across Australia, but home to 20% of the population. And what they're really after is, you know, we develop new suburbs. So developers will come in, state government will release the land and say, we want to expand our city out in that direction. Developers, you know, work with local and state government, and they decide on number of houses and where they'll be. But then local government sort of becomes the guardian, I suppose, for those suburbs in perpetuity. So, you know, each level of government, apart from council, sort of plays a role and then finishes and leaves, and industry finishes and leaves, but councils are responsible and connected to their community forever. So there's a few things that need to happen, and one is they're actually really straightforward, and one of the things that we're really asking for from state and federal government is, as you develop or as you decide to develop a new area for houses, just a bit of extra money, and it's not a massive amount, but a bit of extra money for a community centre or a cultural centre or the library or a basketball court or a swimming pool. All of these sorts of things, which when you move into a new place, it's houses as far as you can see, and you need somewhere to gather. People need to connect, don't they?
Absolutely. And so we supported some work in the city of Wyndham, and you're absolutely right. What you see is tracts of housing with the occasional McDonald's in between them, and that was about it. And one of the things that was really missing, and this is where I'll get to, is around the coordination between state and local, is this issue to do with the frequency of trains going through, and there's no local bus service that actually connects with the time of the train. So people are taking 3 hours simply to leave home to get to the bus in order to get to wait at the train station until the train comes. And so we were trying to find ways of supporting more home-based businesses. And one of those, for instance, a local community bus that might be able to fill that void. As you say, there are all these opportunities that open up as a result of it. So
absolutely.
Do you have any thoughts about what we need to do to increase that coordination between local and state when they are, you know, choosing to do these large-scale developments?
I'd love to see it mandated. You know, I'd love to see that just as federal funding for hospitals, for example, flows through very, very slowly, but it does flow through based on population growth and you know, the number of people living in a hospital catchment area, I suppose. But that can take years and years to flow through. So I'd love to see a similar sort of model that can be delivered really quickly. So for every 1,000 houses, you know, there needs to be funded, and, you know, councils are really happy to co-fund.
As are increasingly developers.
That's right. So, but there needs to be something mandated, because there are some brilliant examples where some of the major developers have got great relationships with councils and they have built a community centre first up. Or, there's one in City of Casey. It's a bit of an old example now, but they built the community centre that's like the neighbourhood house in the first row of houses that were built. And it just served as a hub and a connector. And, it did incredible good for that community. And there's another one up in the city of Whittlesea where, there's a great cafe and park built as part of the development. And we've seen some great ones in Mount Barker in Adelaide as well. And, all these things that can be done very easily. So, that's what we'd like to see. And at the federal level at the moment, the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government, it's a big portfolio, Minister Catherine King has just established an urban policy forum, which I'm lucky enough to have been appointed to, which we hope will have a look at these more holistic issues. Yeah. So as we've been talking about, it's not just the freeway interchange or the train line. It's as simple as a playground or a basketball court or, a space where people can gather. Yeah. And you don't always need planned activities because people are pretty
resourceful.
They are pretty resourceful. But, through my work with Volunteering Victoria as well, I see lots of great examples of people who just get up and do something.
Get on with it. And I think that's so true.
But they often just need a space to do that. Yeah.
But there's also, I think, a mentality that needs to be in place that supports ongoing co-design. With communities, because you're absolutely right. You need to indicate that social cohesion matters in your local areas by building that first thing, that community centre, that basketball court. But you need to then have in place a process by which you keep adding on to that, so that everybody does actually have a vision about the type of future, and they're helping to create that future as well. So you're absolutely right. The volunteering mentality, that preparedness to actually participate is there. It's there pretty much with everybody because they want to have the best possible environment for where they live. So I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about any other examples that you've got where you've seen this type of community-based volunteering that's actually activated a particular local area.
Yeah, look, there's lots of those really sort of micro actions, I suppose, and we've we've really embraced the term community giving and community building as much as volunteering, because quite often people don't see themselves as volunteers. They think they're just doing something for their community, and so there are lots of lovely little examples of some of that guerrilla gardening, for example, where an overlooked space will suddenly have some trees in it, and then people will gather and help out, and it becomes a source of pride for that little neighbourhood group. And then you have some other fantastic examples of people who have faced a challenge and then reach out to others so that they can sort of work together to avoid it in the future. And I met a fantastic young man called Mahamed a few weeks back at National Volunteer Week, and he he faced some racism in his everyday life, and decided that he had the resourcefulness and the energy and the ambition to try and stop that happening to others. So, he gathered people together who had experienced that, and, set up a training facility to be able to sort of help others to understand what they were doing and the impact they were having. And, you see lots of great examples where sometimes, in Penrith in Western Sydney, that the council put together a whole sort of resilience strategy, which was based around how do we build that social cohesion, bring people together. And it only took a little nudge. It just took a little nudge, one opportunity to be provided, and community members just took it and ran with it. So whether that's pop-up coffee shops or, sort of all these pop-up parks and things like that, it just needs, they ran with it.
You raise a really important point, which I think, the past year is sort of really emphasised, which is to do with crisis resilience as well. Floods, bushfires, whatever, that importance of people wanting to protect their own communities, but also their ability to come together and talk to each other about and then coordinate to be able to respond to those particular needs as a result of a particular crisis is just so important. And so this creating these nudges, these opportunities for occasional volunteering or for those that want it to be a bigger part of their lives, for people to actually have an ability to volunteer in a substantial way, all contributes to that resilience within those communities.
It really does. And, another issue facing outer suburban communities is that they keep being built in areas prone to natural disasters. So whether it's bushfire or flood or storms. And so, yes, there's, really important volunteer role in responding to disaster and, activating in that emergency response space. But just as important, and something that I'm really passionate about, is the long-term recovery. And that comes, it builds resilience, it builds connection, but it has to come from a connected community to start with. And
absolutely, because
I think that's the danger, especially when have a lot of outer suburban areas are multicultural hubs. There's one in every 3 households is people born overseas, and it's just this wonderful vibrancy and energy that multicultural communities bring, but they also bring, a lack of experience in facing an Australian bushfire season, for example. So,
but many do bring absolute experience in dealing with a crisis.
100%, yeah, absolutely. So bringing all those experiences and skills together, I think that's what makes outer suburban areas something quite special. And, they are the future of Australia. There's a million young people, million sort of teenagers and kids. And
babies being born today.
Every day, many of them.
Absolutely. Now, I've just got one last question, though. You said you grew up in Werribee.
Yes.
Werribee used to be a long way out. It's not such a long way out anymore. Do you have a view about if there was, given that you've seen that sort of time horizon play out around the growth of these suburbs, have you got a view about if there was one radical change? And I suspect you might go back to that comment that you made before about mandating things, but nonetheless, have you got an idea about what is one of the things that we could actually do to ensure that going forward we have suburbs that do really foster that community engagement and that ability to have a voice about what needs to be in place for communities to be developed?
Well, certainly that mandating issue, mandating social and community infrastructure. But another thing that's been on my mind is it's more of a cultural shift. And it's more about looking out. So looking away from the CBD to opportunity. And I think there is so much opportunity in outer suburban areas. And those towns like Werribee, which when my family moved there in the early 80s into the brand new house on the, the last street, there were paddocks and with cows in across the road. And now, you can drive another 15 Ks and still be in housing. But it was called the country suburb back then. But now it's on its way to being a city. like a genuine city. And so I think it's a cultural shift to say, you know, Melbourne CBD or Sydney CBD, you know, they're still our sort of anchors in a way, but we can achieve those same sort of city experiences in other places. And so if we look outwards, whether it's to, you know, Blacktown in Sydney, Liverpool, or, you know, up to sort of around in Adelaide, around the Playford, you know, Elizabeth area, like there are lots of areas that can become cities themselves.
Yeah.
They are cities.
Well, just look at Parramatta.
Parramatta, exactly. But if we could actually culturally shift our thinking to see places other than the CBD as legitimate cities that need servicing and can meet all our needs, then, you know, I think that could be a really great step forward.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Bronwen, for spending this time with us. It's been terrific to have a chat to you about issues that just affect absolutely everybody.
Yes.
And we certainly need to talk more about how important it is to think and plan ahead. So
wonderful.
Thank you very, very much, Bronwen.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
To give us a local practitioner perspective on belonging and community dynamics in Australian neighbourhoods, we're joined by Ahmed. Mahamed, who is also known as Mo Social Impact, is a passionate advocate for African Australians. Mahamed is an established and experienced speaker, facilitator and trainer, working as a youth and community practitioner for almost a decade across both government and not-for-profit sectors. He currently works with the Victorian Department of Education. Mahamed is also, though, the co-founder and director of the Better Men Project, a mental health service which delivers evidence-based programs, workshops, professional development and seminars to better the mental health and skills of young men and those that support them. Welcome, Mahamed.
Thank you for having me, Anthea. And that's a mouthful there. So
no, it's absolutely terrific, and you are a really important component in this discussion about neighbourhoods. I'm really interested, though, to know about how you got interested in the work that you do. What was the genesis, if you like, or the experience that made you decide that, quite apart from having a full-time job, you decided that you wanted to put your discretionary time towards the work that you do with Better Men?
That's a really good question. So as from how I got into the work, and I'll touch on that a little bit, just to kind of give you a bit of an intro on who I am and my backdrop a little bit. Anthea, I would say I went through life, and life kind of directed me into this work that I'm in. I went through, grew up in West Brunswick in the inner city suburbs of Melbourne, and I would say I was very disconnected from many of the different community pillars that exist, and I found myself in a bit of a downward spiral, and I got myself into a little bit of trouble in my teen years that I required support myself, and it was through the form of community services and various community assets that supported my journey in rehabilitation and kind of come up out of a dark patch in my teen years, which consisted of a youth justice encounter as well, where I encountered the youth justice YJ system here in Victoria. So to shorten it a little bit, it was those experiences, those dark times, that kind of opened the door for services and good people and good service providers, and a community-based response that it opened me to a world of community service and the power of giving and the power to inspire young people. And I consider myself a byproduct of that when done well, and I haven't looked back since. We started with my days at the YMCA, which was one of my first interactions with the community service, and it's just been a passion of mine, and I've pursued it professionally, and now dedicated my career to supporting young people not to have to go down a path of a similar type of path, which may be a little bit more traumatic and a little bit more a steep learning curve, and that's what I do.
It does seem, though, that a lot of this comes naturally to you because you have this ability to relate to other young people and what their needs are. You mentioned the importance of community services. Do you think that young people, well, one, are there enough community services, but do you think young people actually know how to reach out to those community services?
That's a really good question, and I think that's part of the work that needs to be done, and the conversation that needs to be had. My personal take on services is that we need to reimagine, how we're operating, because there is a bit of a disconnect when it comes. Especially, I'll talk from an African Australian perspective because I am an African Australian advocate, and I work closely with the African Australian communities, and I am myself an African Australian, so I can speak very intimately about this as well. A lot of the services aren't, they don't work hard enough to reach those that are not convenient to reach, and that's part of the problem, and it's been a gap. And to be blunt, be fair as well, I think it's more difficult to go out of your way and build a relationship and extend an arm or communities that you don't have that connection with, and it does take a little bit more coverage from a service perspective, and a little bit more, it's a little bit more work. Let's just put it is to go and build those relationships. And I think it's not on the young people to find services, and I think it's the services to make themselves available and to make themselves known, or where they are and where they're operating. And for young people to engage with the services when they choose to do so, and if they need to do so, if they do need to engage with any of these services. So it's a conversation that I think that services need to lead, and I think the community sector we need to reimagine what that looks like a little bit, because there is a disconnect in young people accessing services. Yes. Especially African Australian young people.
Mahamed, it strikes me that, during COVID, it became abundantly aware to government that they needed to be able to talk to the community via community organisations, volunteer or otherwise, that could help to get the information about COVID and vaccines right down to the individual level. One of the concerns that I guess generally we have is that those connections, those networks that were built up, are not being used now for a variety of other opportunities that are really do need, as you said, the community to be able to connect through to the individual, so that the individual doesn't have to go out looking for it, that they know what services are available. Do you think there is a stepping back by government, that you were there when we needed you, but right now we're okay, we're just doing our thing? Do you think there is any degree of that stepping back from those networks?
Well, look, I won't speak for the government yet, but what I'll say is that, look, I think there was a lot of lessons to be learned from the COVID responses, and I think that the lessons that we did learn was the community's ability to respond and to lead responses that are serving them. And we saw that in the Towers lockdown, and in the Flemington region, North Melbourne region there, and we all know that story very well, and the power of those responses. And we saw it across the state, whether it's material aid. I was part of a material aid initiative here in Greater Dandenong, where I reside, and I used to work in the Greater Dandenong community, and you see the power of community and their ability to respond, because it was council partnering with communities to deliver tons of food or material aid and essential items during a time of need. But what I will say is that, look, there's lessons that are quite clear, and they'll quite visible, and that's the community's capacity to lead a response and to support their communities, and their ability to partner effectively with government as well. So we know that is. So looking at it from that premise, I would say there is greater opportunity, and I'm a big advocate of this as well. And those that know me well will know that I've always bang on about community-led responses, and we've always kind of just been a middle. There's been some additional personal or process that's been put in front of community. So we could never, partner directly with certain larger entities. And but I think that's shifting. I think there's been a change. I think we have good community operators. I think we've got great leadership and growing, I should say, growing leadership in African Australian communities as well. Mm-hmm. So there needs to be more of that. I think we need to continue that and build on it, because that's where the solutions are going to come from. Yeah.
Now, one word that gets bandied about a great deal is this term belonging. And certainly the sense that if you cultivate a sense of belonging, that will help to build social cohesion, will help to build this sense of acceptance within communities. Is that the case? Do you think that the term belonging is appropriately used or overused potentially?
Look, it has been. It's become a buzzword, hasn't it, Anthea? Mm-hmm. Look, it's kind of something that's it become a bit airy-fairy a little bit, and it's how it's used, and it's kind of lost its significance especially in the community sector. It's used a lot as well. Yeah. For me, look, my understanding, and it's something that informs my practice. So I'll start off by that. As a practitioner in this space and as a professional, that's something we aspire is to connect young people to the communities which they belong, and that they're part of, and to create a greater sense of belonging. But to understand sense of belonging, we've got to look at what are the tenets of it. Let's break it down, and let's look at what are the components within that need to be considered. It's things like, psychological safety, it's things like acceptance, it's things, empathy, people's ability to connect as well with experiences of individuals that don't look like them or don't share, the same path of life as them. It's about connection as well. We live in a day and age where the digital age, and we'll get into this conversation a little bit later in sense of belonging, that young people are more connected than ever, but we got rates of depression at all-time high. We got, rates of anxiety and loneliness as well among young people that are soaring as well. So you can be connected, and that's where even the digital connection and what's the quality of that connection.
I think that's such an important point. Absolutely, because belonging. We tend to use it, and certainly, as you say, within community services, we tend to use it in a very positive frame. But in actual fact, people can gravitate to all sorts of places to get a sense of belonging, and not all of them are necessarily the most positive places for them in the long term. So I think it's really important, as you've done, to break it down into what are those components. But young people have their own set of dynamics. They're finding their own way in the world. They're trying to figure out their identity and where they actually want to spend their time. So are you seeing any changes in young people at the moment that has an impact on your ability to help them navigate those aspects of belonging?
Oh, yeah, I'd say definitely. I think post-COVID, what you're seeing is, we were took a few steps backwards in the connections and our young people's engagement in wider community, and I think COVID's impacted that. We're seeing, a reconnection and those relationships are advancing, to at a rate. But social media, I'd say the biggest thing is the digital connections, and what are the implications of the digital connections versus the quality in-person connection. Because when we grew up, Anthea, as well, we didn't have this. I'd start off by pressures of social media. We didn't have the pressures of the digital world. So we got this evolving world where everything is at the fingertips of young people, and the connections and the gaming, e-gaming, everything it's all happening through a screen, the interactions, and it's affecting, I think, the connections that they make outside of that world, which is the screen world, I'll call it, or the digital world. So that's one thing that I believe is affecting the quality of those relationships that young people are forming. But also, I would say it's one of the biggest things that I'm noticing as well is that, especially from an African Australian perspective, is there isn't a willingness when you talk about connection to put yourself in environments that don't have people that look like you, or don't have people that that you feel
you can relate to. Yeah.
Share those experiences or relatable to you. So a good example of that is, I believe local governments play a significant role in the landscape of connection in neighbourhood and communities. I think that's one of the biggest pillars. And I've got a local government background and working across several local government areas. I believe the power of local government in establishing meaningful connections for young people, and the role of establishing pathways and increasing youth participation. Local government is at the forefront of that work, alongside the NGOs and whatnot. And that's a gap that I've identified, is the lack of diversity within local government areas, especially those that I believe that the local government areas should reflect the communities that they serve.
So, Mahamed, I'm really interested in, co-design, if you like, and the sense of ensuring that young people have a voice in whatever the programming is that's designed, or that they have a way of being able to say, stop doing that and do more of this type of conversation. But in many respects, even at the local government level, there might be a small handful of individuals who are prepared to stand up and participate in committees and things and share their thoughts. But as a result, a large number of actual young people aren't participating. They're defaulting, if you like, to those individuals that choose to sit on committees. And at the same time, for other organisations, whether they're NGOs or government, they want to send out surveys, they want to go and find more information. But it was explained to me the other day, where you have a particularly a preference for oral tradition, the idea of completing a survey is just anathema. So I'm curious about, how do we ensure that there is the broadest possible voice of African Australians coming up, whether it's to local government or to NGOs or to others?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's my response would say, I'll start off by saying I believe that young people should have a voice across all matters that concern them. Yeah, and our communities, it's about valuing the voices and contributions and seeing it as a strength, and and seeing the strengths, the contributions from African Australians and young people in general, and recognizing they do have something to contribute into the conversation and the communities. I believe when you look at community assets, the same way we look at the African Australians in a sporting lens, in say sporting clubs as a community asset, for instance, and we look at it through the lens of the contribution within that realm. I think it's accepted. It's accepted that they've got skill sets and they can add value to the common goal, the shared goal. But it's about bringing that into other areas, whether it is on committees, leadership committees, whether it is part of a broader conversation. That's extends beyond just the physical abilities, and it's about recognizing that, hey, they do have something to contribute to the conversation, and they can provide value in this space. And then it's about, okay, now that once we recognize, okay, they do have the capacity to contribute, how are we going to engage them is the big question.
Absolutely.
And that's
huge.
And I'll call that the $1 million question. And I've worked in youth participation, increasing youth participation across the local government areas that I've served. So it's about, how do we engage these communities and how do we engage, I'll say, the harder to reach, and because traditionally these environments weren't set up for us. Let's be honest, and it wasn't designed by us, and it wasn't designed for us, And when we accept that and we recognize that, it's not a shot at anybody or any system. It's more, okay, how do we make these environments more suitable for the people that we're trying to attract, and the people that we know we should be engaging, because that's the communities that we're serving, and that's what our community looks like. So we should look like that. So I keep banging on about representation, because I think that's a step one. If you want to get people in through the door, they need to see people that look like them, and that's an indicator of, safety, that these guys value the contributions of our people, because they're there, that you can see them, it's visible, why not? But even beyond that, it's like, going out, like I touched on earlier, going out doing the work, they're harder to reach. So it's going to take a little bit more effort to establish those relationships. It's going to take a little bit more effort to buy that community trust. It's got to be a two-way conversation here, and it's got to be very similar to co-design. Anytime we've initiated in any co-design process, it's not about us trying to squeeze resources and what we need out of the other party. It's a co-collaboration. It's a collaborative effort where two parties are coming together, bringing their strengths to the table and making it mutually beneficial. So how do we make it beneficial for our young people, young African Australians, to enter youth services, community facility at the local government area, how to feel comfortable enough to apply for an internship within that organisation. So that's the conversation that we need to be having is, are we doing enough, and are we really trying to reach those that we say that we should be serving, that we are trying to serve? Because the committees that I've run in the past and whatnot, it tends to draw similar faces, the same type of people are attracted to these positions, and it's not that our young African Australian students or young people aren't capable of participating in these opportunities, but it's either that the mode in which you're communicating isn't reaching, like you said, it's not suitable, whether it's, you're sending out to residents and mail, how many of these homes are going to open, or whether it's an email to a database that doesn't even include have any representation anyway, because you haven't previously engaged the community, so it's redundant. And you've got to look at how are we communicating, or how are we sharing our opportunities. And then on top of that, how are we going the extra mile? How are we going to have a tailored strategy for this cohort to make sure that we have a separate strategy away from the mainstream one, and it's not a tick box kind of strategy. You're actually assertive and very assertive with your promotions, and you're very intentional that you want to build this trust, and it's a commitment that you're making, that you're going to see through. Yeah.
When you spend time with young people and talk to them about their lives in Australia, many of which have been born in Australia, what are some of the things that they say to you about what their experience is like, both positive and negative? What are the things that they would put into those two buckets?
Oh, look, you will start with get the elephant out the room a little bit, I reckon. I reckon it's the stories that we hear, the narratives we hear in the media, Anthea, is that it impacts young people. We see the narratives that are pushed about African Australians, for instance, and again, I'm making it an African Australian centric conversation, because that's kind of
what it should be.
That's kind of that. And I sit on the Victorian African Communities Committee as well, and represent the experiences of African Australians, and I often engage with this conversation. So it's at the tip of my tongue at the moment as well. So it's with the experiences of African Australians. It's first of all, when we talk about sense of belonging, if young people don't, the point I touched on, the tenets of sense of belonging, psychological safety, if the stories that they're hearing is impacting their psychological safety, and compromising who they are, because sense of belonging is a fundamental, it's an essential, it's a fundamental right. It's not a nice to have, it's a need to have. It's got health implications if you don't belong, and once you recognize that, and you see it through the lens, what young people are saying is that these narratives that are being pushed is impacting who we are and how we feel about ourselves.
Well,
So if something,
it affects their physical
yeah,
safety as well.
for sure, and their physical safety as well. So it's so you look at it from that component, it's very difficult for them to connect with the Australian experience, and I'm not saying that they don't feel Australian, but they feel as if they're getting pushed away. So it's a bit of a challenge, isn't it? So it's a conversation that needs to be had, and we need to do better at how we portray ourselves, and how we work to counter that narrative. And I think it's about taking back our narrative, and you're seeing it now in community, and there's a lot of youth-led, a lot of community-led responses, and I think the community is at a really nice point in re-establishing and retelling our stories from our perspectives as well. So it's a negative that's kind of led to a positive as well. It's empowered. I think it's empowered the communities to be the holder of the fence.
Have you heard comments from young people that have surprised you, that have been more on the positive side of things that you weren't expecting?
From a positive lens, young people. Look, there's a great opportunity. There's what they're seeing is more role models than ever in the community. They've got access to a variety of visible leaders. That's shifting. There's been a shift in that. So when I was growing up, I didn't have a lot of that. I grew up in a single parent home, and not to make it about me, but it's when there's an absence of a male figure or father figure or a male leader or whatever it is, you know what I mean? A figure, however you want to phrase it, it leaves a hole in a young person, and to navigate, another bit of them, especially young men, in how to, and also young women and young girls as well. But it's challenging, and it's we're our culture as well. Unfortunately, it's at higher. So I'm talking about from East African backgrounds. It's more prevalent as well to that fathers are either not as engaged as they need to be, or are not present. So if you look at it from that perspective, the importance of having role models and people to connect with, to kind of fill that gap and fill that hole, becomes very, very important and essential.
I guess having those role models in local communities, in that physical presence, is also really important, because, as you say, we want to get people away from connecting in via their screens for 100% of what they're doing, and spend more time physically in the local area, but with role models that are really helping them figure out how to deal with all the issues that they're confronting. So it's a really important component, I think.
Too right, and that's the work, and it's not about token highs. It's not about it's not about ticking a box. Hey, I've got both. I'm done, and half my job is done. And it's also about now that you have diversity within your organisation, how are you going to nurture that asset?
Yeah.
How are you going to make sure that your spaces that these assets and communities have connected with is supporting their journey. It's about retention and how you're going to make it a safe space, a culturally safe space, and how you're going to identify what are the strengths and contributions or skill sets that this person comes with that I can leverage and support and hone in and put them in position to win, I would say.
Absolutely.
Is the best way to put it.
Yeah, set them up for success.
Half the work.
I've got two final questions. One is, what advice would you give for a young African Australian's neighbour?
Get to know them, get to know their story, their aspirations, and find a way that you can share your skills, knowledge, wisdom, and impart that knowledge onto them, and if they're willing to take it in and soak it in, and
maybe listen to them impart knowledge to you as well.
and vice versa. That is for sure. Every conversation is a two-way conversation, and it's about, you can learn and benefit just as much, if not more, from the experiences of young people and through the lens of young people and their perspectives. And
it all starts with a hello,
and an openness. Open hearts and open minds. That's what I often say. And it's about entering every encounter with that, and not just in your neighbor as well. I'm talking about the shop that you go
Absolutely.
to. Yeah, the supermarkets, and when you're at the sporting club as well. If your children are playing sports, and get engaged with other children as well, and just initiate a conversation, because that's what it is. Young people want that conversation. They're open for that conversation, and they're willing to step up and lead conversations as well. So yeah.
The final question is, I believe you had an incredibly successful multicultural youth leadership conference recently. What made it successful for you?
Yeah, a lot of that was around challenging the narratives, and first of all, that was in partnership with Endeavour Youth Australia, who was leading that conference as well. And it was a great partnership and great work that they co-designed alongside myself. But for us, what it was, Anthea, it was exactly what we spoke about in this conversation. It was about taking back, being the holders of our pen, and connecting students from multicultural backgrounds to the array of professionals that are thriving across sectors, so many different sectors, and the young people were taken aback, and the feedback and evaluation was so positive and overwhelmingly it was well received. But it was hard to believe that they hadn't happened before. That was probably
Oh, absolutely.
It wasn't for us.
That's one of the things I think people forget, is how rapidly different communities are evolving and taking control of how they want their lives and their stories to actually be communicated more broadly. So congratulations on that, and to the others that were involved. That's fantastic. But I do want to thank you very much for spending this time with us today. It's been a terrific conversation and a delightful way of reminding us how important both the smile is, but also a sense of actually recognising what everybody's got to contribute to their own local communities. So thank you very much, Mahamed.
No, thank you. This is an important conversation, and we could probably have a couple more hours, but I'll leave you guys to it. But thanks for having me, first and foremost, and for pushing a conversation that's super close to my heart. And I know that the Scanlon Foundation do an incredible bit for their communities as well. And we recognise that, we see it, Anthea. So continue to support and give back to initiatives that are contributing immensely. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks, Mahamed. Well, Faisal, they were two terrific guests. Bronwen came from a really different perspective, very much about that sort of local government infrastructure perspective, but she had the insights because of her experience with Volunteering Victoria. And then Mahamed is all about the ground up. It's about talking to young people to figure out what they actually need within those communities. So this ability for both of those things to be informed by each other is a really challenging area.
And it was interesting to hear how both of them connected local government together when Bronwen mentioned the ability of local government to not just open up land, etc., but also have that responsibility of making some of these spaces, places where people can come and do things. I think Mose was actually speaking a little bit about that as well. So it was really interesting to hear the local government message come really strongly through.
Absolutely. And it is really interesting that short-term immediate need versus planning long-term, almost decades out.
Yeah. I think probably both of them, maybe particularly Bronwen, spoke about that need for us to think more strategically about the places where people are coming to live, because they're the future of Australia. that 1 million folks that she mentioned. I'm not sure what that figure was, but I think she did allude to the fact that is the next generation of Australians. So
absolutely. And then Mo comes in talking about, well, if you're going to have young people living in these areas, which is what we want, you really need to make sure that you that they have that sense of being a part of that local community and not sitting in their rooms necessarily just connecting with people online.
Yeah.
They actually have to be out physically doing stuff in the community.
Do you remember, Anthea, being connected to your local council when you were younger?
No, I have no thinking. But in actual fact, the services, though, I think they were things, you just walk along the road, that you expect it to be, that the grass to be mowed, that's the whole sense of that. But and safety, those things I think are all the result of the local councils. But as a young person, the local council's not necessarily something that you connect with. But the YMCA was certainly something that I did that Mahamed mentioned right at the very start.
Yeah.
That was very much a part of my childhood.
Yeah, well, growing up, I always didn't have an association with Wyndham as a name. That I found that out later.
Yeah.
But I always had association with Hoppers Crossing.
Ah.
So, and we actually had a lot of people that the way that they articulated their belonging was like, they'd make music and their postcode of our area was their names for their musician artists, or etc.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting. People identified with the postcode, but perhaps not with the national story, which I think we probably kind of didn't tease out here, but it does probably lend to a future conversation about why people feel really associated with something as much as a number.
Absolutely.
But not with the whole broader society.
Yeah. Well, then the coming up episodes deal with some really macro, big picture type national issues. So it is going to be interesting to see what those guests have to say about those topics.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to the Voices of Australia podcast, brought to you by the Scanlon Foundation Research Institute. This podcast is produced by me, Faisal Farah, and with audio, visual, recording and editing by John Bigelow from Interactive Media Solutions. Research for each episode is provided by Agalos Makrijojos and Matthew Skidmore. Original music is by Steve Klapsinos. Learn more about the Scanlon Foundation Research Institute and all its works by visiting the website www.scanloninstitute.org.au.